Hey gang, I'm back. I clawed my way out of my depression hole and realized that this is actually the last week of class, so we're going to have to kind of move through these next couple of chapters pretty quick. I'm going to see if I can cover them all right now. And since it's the last week of class, you'll need some assignments. Test 1 is already on Blackboard. And tests 2 and 3 should be by the time this video goes up, so I'm going to try to get that done. But yeah, let's talk about Chapter 3, Rehabilitation. So rehabilitation is not retributivism. We're not punishing someone because they deserve it. We're not trying to deter them through fear. We're trying to get them to a place where they don't need to commit crime anymore, or they don't want to. They reject crime out of choice. So a big part of that, well, I'll get to that in a second. One thing that's kind of nice about rehabilitation is that we can justify it through a deontological point of view, that it's just the right thing to do, that these are people who need help, so we help them. That's what we should do. And we can also look at it from a consequentialist point of view, a utilitarian point of view, where what we want is less crime. So it's like deterrence in that way, in that we are trying to lower the amount of crime, but we're doing it by removing the need for crime, or finding out why people are committing crime and trying to fix that so they don't need to, instead of just punishing them, trying to scare them out of it. Hey, baby. Hey. I got new cats, by the way. And as you might have noticed, I live in a new place. This is not my bedroom anymore. But whatever, it's been a crazy semester. Because we're trying to look at why people commit crime, there's a lot of ways we could try to go about rehabilitation. And a big way we try to do that is therapeutic, through therapy. And this can just be like with a therapist. It could be with a psychologist, so if you need meds, you can get on meds. Note that might require universal health care, so people can actually pay for their meds or have them supplied for free. And also tackling drug and alcohol abuse. And that's a major problem for most offenders, says the book. Between 1/3 to half of all new prisoners in England and Wales are believed to be problem drug users, where drug-related crime alone costs £13.5 billion. And that was a while ago. Another solution there might be to make drugs not crimes. I don't know. I'm not an expert. That just seems like an idea. But things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or dialectic behavioral therapy, similar programs to that. There's also recreational therapy or therapeutic recreation, where get those reprobates, those prisoners, to like play team sports and build a community way of thinking, or have them express themselves through art and creation and find better outlets than violence or whatever they were doing. That's a good one. The book brings up the medicalization of crime. Like, if we just treat crime like a disease, maybe we can try to cure it. That's kind of a interesting way of looking at things, and it does have some criticisms. But another way we can rehabilitate is with education. Now, this could be like job training, so that they have jobs, so that they don't need to steal or whatever. But also morality education. Now, that one starts to get a little weird. Like, do we want the government to be trying to like teach a standardized set of morals? We don't want to like brainwash people, but at the same time, she's so cute. I don't know. There must be something lacking for these people to be embezzling millions of dollars, or raping a whole bunch of people, or things like that. Hey, baby. What else? Oh yeah, mentoring schemes aimed at social reintegration. So you have like an accountability buddy. A lot of these people, a lot of criminals lack a good social support network. They lack that kind of social capital. So, like having a sponsor for AA, have a sponsor for not committing crime anymore. Sorry, it just made me think like, hey man, I'm about to go commit some crimes. I need you to talk me down. I don't know if I don't think that's how it works. And it doesn't have to be just one of these. It can be a combination. So one question that already comes up immediately is like, is this really punishment? Is this really loss? That was a big part of our definition, is that it's a loss. We're punishing someone. And you could say, yeah, sure, it's a loss of their freedoms. They still have to go through these rehabilitation programs. And they're not allowed not to. But let's see. The book goes into a good part about morality and, yeah, not all crimes are immoral. Not all immorality is criminal. The justice gap between those crimes where moral education may be a relevant possibility and those crimes for which it is not. Yeah, so the interplay of legal moralism here. Because you could kind of say that, like, gay conversion camps that's just rehabilitation. That's just moral education. They need to know that sticking it in other dudes' butts is morally wrong. And yet, gay conversion therapy is terrible. And it doesn't work anyway. What else? The problem of individualization is the idea that there's a sense of justice and fairness in making sure that all crimes are punished equally. Like, you do the same crime, you do the same punishment. But since people are different, they're going to have different rehabilitative needs. So does that make it unfair that one person, like, does one crime and goes through drug rehabilitation, and another person does the same crime and, like, goes through playing hoops and arts and crafts? Or, I don't know. That's a really simplistic example, but it is different things for these different people. Is that fair? And finally, does it work? Is this successful? The answer is a resounding kind of promising. It's not a open and shut, like, heck yeah, this works great. It's not a, no, that's stupid and useless and doesn't help. There's potential. One problem here is that it just hasn't really been used enough. It hasn't really been applied and studied enough to know. So, kind of, yeah, but it needs more study. There is evidence that, like the book says, reoffending is closely entwined with housing problems and drug and alcohol abuse. This strongly suggests that we should not consider reoffending in isolation from other factors if we desire effective crime reduction. And I guess another question there is, like, sending them to a therapist for a little while and making sure they get off of crack. Sure, that's great while you've got them, but they have to go back to a community that may have been, rampaged by political fuckery or the CIA injecting crack into their communities. I don't know, that's just an example. Maybe they've been forced to live in poorer sides of town with lead paint on the walls. So there's bigger problems than just the individual. But maybe we can address those. I don't know. Anyway, rehabilitation works best when it's targeted, properly resourced, and supported by a clear political commitment. And that last one's actually kind of a hard thing, because when you start going around telling, hardcore retributivists, this is not just a criminal in isolation, it's a human, it's a good person, and we're going to help them. And they think, like, Fuck that. It's a criminal. Punish them. It's not a very popular idea. It's kind of a hard sell, especially in certain regions of the United States. So, needs political support. That brings us to Chapter 4, Restorative Justice. Restorative justice is somewhat similar, but not really. That's maybe the least helpful thing I've said. Restorative justice is about restoring the broken social bond. One thing that makes restorative justice unique is that it brings in the offender and the community and the victim. All three parts get a voice in what happens. So rather than just a judge and jury in prison, which is really just the community, the offender doesn't really get a voice other than to defend themselves, and the victim doesn't get a voice either. That's how it normally works, and there's a reason for that. Like, we like to hope that justice and punishment will be impartial, whereas a victim would be partial. A victim would be biased, most likely. Well, potentially. Yeah, hey, baby. But that also means that the victim might not have a lot of trust in the justice system, or people generally might not have a lot of trust in the justice system. So the idea is that we bring together all of these stakeholders, everybody with a stake in the crime and what happened, to have a restorative conference where the victim, offender, or representative of the community come together before an impartial arbiter or arbitrator to come up with some restorative contract that says what's going to happen and how, and what will happen if the contract is broken. So it could just be like, well, we have to drop a new contract. Or it could be like, you know what, this isn't working, just go through the normal justice system, go to prison. So prison can still be an option, but ideally, restoration would be a prison abolitionist philosophy. Ideally, we don't use prison at all if we can help it. So whereas rehabilitation allows prisons, because that's where they're going to be, making popcorn necklaces. I should stop making fun of what they do in rehabilitation. Where they have therapy and stuff like that. That can be in prison. Restorative justice is going to avoid prison entirely if it can. So things like curfew or house arrest or paying back the amount of harm that you've done, or getting therapy. It doesn't have to be in prison, though. Things like that. So again, we have a question of like, does this really count as punishment? And it can, for sure. Punishment doesn't have to be just prison. What else? Yeah. One big thing here is the role of victims. So it's a way to give a victim a voice so that they don't feel victimized a second time by having to go through this system. This is something that could be particularly good for victims of sex offenses because, it really sucks. A lot of people just don't even report because of the stigma associated with being a victim, because of the ways their abuser might come for them more or harder, of the ways that cops just won't believe them, or having to go over your story over and over and relive it over and over. There's a lot of ways that it's difficult. Not that restorative justice would specifically fix all of those, but it would mean they weren't just a cog in this justice machine. It would mean that we listen to the victim and what they want. If they want to just move on, fine. We listen to that and take it into account in this restorative contract. Some terms I want you to know here. Victim displacement. Is that what the one I wanted to talk about? The justice gap. The justice gap in this restorative justice chapter is the space between reported and unreported crimes. The majority of crimes are unreported. And that's why I was just talking about that. I don't need to go back over it. Again, we may lose consistency in how crimes are punished. The same crime might be punished in a different way depending on how the restorative conference goes. There's a little bit in this chapter about community sentencing, punitive rehabilitation, educative and employability training, compulsory unpaid work. That's called slavery, right? I mean, thanks, 13th Amendment. Anyway, compulsory unpaid work. Yeah. One thing that I'm not sure why is in this particular chapter is shame punishments, and that's kind of interesting. You see those pictures of like parents who make their kids stand out on the street corner wearing a sign like, I talk back and I think I know everything, or stuff like that, or like, I stole and now this is my punishment. The book describes two ways of thinking about it. Disintegrative shaming, which is bad for integration, which makes the person being shamed less a part of the community, and kind of forces them out. That's not what we want, and it doesn't really work because it removes any kind of social safety net. Reintegrative shaming is an attempt to instill a change of heart in the offender. So to be like, to make them understand that, like, look, what you did is wrong. Like, you did a bad thing. We need to fix this. So there's some opponents to shame punishments. And how can you make sure that you're being reintegrative with shame rather than disintegrative? Limits of restorative justice. One is the idea of which community actually gets a voice. Like, is it just that neighborhood? Is it the county, people in the county? Is it the state? Like, is it the entire country? Is that the community that's involved in this case? Is it just a certain group of people or people with a certain trait? Or, I don't know, race? Is it just people involved in one business or something? Finding and identifying the community is definitely a challenge. Not an insurmountable one, though. But there's also the problem of including the victims. Like, there's a reason we have victim and they may just not want to be involved. And third is the problem of public confidence. This is something it shares with rehabilitation. Just, can we make people trust this system? Are they going to be okay with a system that's not about just like, yep, you did crime, kill him, put him in jail forever, whatever. People like that. It gives a sense, it's a very strong sense of confidence around that for some people, even though those have their own problems, as we've discussed already. Another problem is the requirement of guilt. If the offender doesn't think they did anything wrong, none of this is going to work. Same with rehabilitation, honestly. If we can't get the offender to a place where they know they did something wrong and feel bad and want to fix it, then it's not going to work. There has to be that element of reform. Or remorse, excuse me. If we're going to see reform, we must have that remorse. And so that brings the question of, like, for rehabilitation, the unrehabilitatable. Or for restorative justice, like, can we make this conference even happen? Again, I guess just throw them in prison can still be a backup. Restorative justice is, again, highly promising. In the places where it's been used, a majority of offenders choose to participate in restorative conferences where available. Preliminary findings show that the restorative justice approach leads to roughly 25% less reoffending than alternatives. Restorative justice is more effective and at significantly less cost because you don't need, to go through the courts. And this hits at a lot of those reasons for crime that I was talking about with rehabilitation. It's by focusing on the community and the society in which the crime happened, we can maybe potentially better address these factors. Homelessness, drug use and abuse, poverty, but having a strong social integration or a strong social safety net. These are things that can really help reduce crime. These are things that have been proven that less crime happens in places where there's more social cohesion. So that's why the whole point of restorative justice is reintegration. And that's why it brings in the offender community and victim together, is we need to work this out so that both of these people can come back into society. Less of a focus on just they need to be punished, less of a focus on we want people not to do crime out of fear, but more be a part of a society, be a part of community, understand that you do have a stake in what happens. And so part of that is we need to make sure that people do feel like stakeholders in their society. But still, inconclusive results. Promising, but inconclusive. Again, a big problem is political will and support. So that's chapters 3 and 4, rehabilitation and restoration. Part 2 gets into hybrid theories, so let's just jump into that real quick. Oh my god, this video is already 20 minutes long. Time flies when I'm talking about rehabilitation. Chapter 5 is about Rawls and Hart and the mixed theory. I'm just going to keep this one short and sweet if I can. Rawls and Hart, they're similar enough for me to just talk about them the same way. What they want to do is split how we look at punishment. We've been talking about the aim of punishment, and we've been talking about I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. What is the word that I'm looking for? Distribution. So the justifying aim of punishment, why we punish, can be separated from the question of whom we punish, how we distribute that punish. So Rawls and Hart here say, well, look, let's just say that the why we punish is deterrence, and the whom we punish is retributivism. So this way we can solve some of the problems of both retributivism and deterrence by saying, we will only punish people who deserve it. Sort of almost a negative retributivism kind of point of view. We punish the deserving because they deserve it, but we do it for the purpose of deterrence. So that's kind of nice. That's kind of neat. But it does raise a big question of why? Why split it this way? Why split it like that and not like any other way? What sort of theoretical basis does this really have? And does it really solve the problems of retributivism and deterrence? It solves some of them, with deterrence, punishing the innocent, and with retributivism, the whole being tied up with deontology and legal moralism. It doesn't fully solve that, but it comes a lot closer. So it's something anyway. We can kind of have the deontology for whom and the utilitarianism for why. So a very negative retributive point of view, saying that desert is necessary for punishment, but it's not sufficient reason for punishment. That's why we need the deterrence part as well. But Why bring those together? Why bring those two together particularly? Just potentially lacking in theoretical grounding. Chapter 6 is about expressivism. Expressivists say, like, hold on, I'm dying. There's the reason I usually don't make videos this long. The idea with expressivism is that, like, well, look, let's not just say that punishment is its own thing. It's not punishment for punishment's sake. But we punish as an expression of the public will. What we all think and feel, we punish to express that. We punish to express to the offender, we don't like what you did. So that's why this is happening. You need to know why I don't like this. We don't like this. So it's a kind of hybrid way to look at things. Yeah. It brings in the retributivist ideas of that it has to be deserved. We're not punishing people who haven't done anything because we're not trying to express any displeasure with what they've done. So it has to be deserved, and it has to be proportional. We have to express displeasure to the proportion of how much we don't like that thing. So it kind of doesn't really have a problem of legal moralism because it's not about, like, this is what's moral and good and true. It doesn't have to come straight from God. It's just like we as a society don't like it. And that's fine. That's kind of an honest way of doing it. What else do I want to talk about? Okay, the communicative theory of punishment is a kind of subsector of expressivism where we not only have the community expressing displeasure with the offender, but we also want the offender to express their remorse to the community. So it's a two-way street if we're looking at it through the lens of the communicative theory of punishment. We want to show as a society that we don't like this thing, and we want the offender to show us that they're sorry, that they get it, they get that we don't want it, and they won't do it again. And this part on what is expressed. So are we expressing emotion like disgust and anger? Are we just expressing like more metaphorically? Or just public perception? It's still pretty close to natural law and legal moralism. I mean, is it not just legal moralism by a different name? That's a good question to ask. That's a reasonable criticism. And then the rest of this chapter, whatever. I guess there's a problem of prison. Like, does prison have to be the way we expressed our displeasure? What about a strongly worded letter? What about what if we do a rap song where we just rap about how bad they are? Would that count? I guess it's hard for a community to write a rap song. A diss track, I believe, is what the kids are calling it. That might have been in the 90s, though. We still have unrepentant offenders. If we're real worried about the communicative theory, if we want that remorse, there's going to be people that just don't care. Just sit in prison going, fuck you, society. I am not remorseful. I know you don't like it, and you can kiss my butt. I'm trying to cuss less, and I'm not doing a good job. judging success, I do like this line here. We might expect from the public. What we might expect from the public does not often match what the public report. The problem is that how we believe the public would respond to cases is often unsupported by the facts. Take public confidence in the police, for example. We might expect ethnic minorities to have much less confidence than the majority group, but this is not always true. One recent UK study found that 52% of white respondents rated the local police as doing a good or excellent job, compared with 59% of respondents from black and minority ethnic groups. Such findings suggest that the public may not always express the concerns we expect them to have. Well, one thing, Tom, is we need to look at different geographic locations and different societies for sure, because what you might expect as a professor at Duke might not apply to these people in the UK. I don't know why. I don't know why black people might have different opinions in the UK than some here. That's a real head scratcher. Anyway. I do like that he says we may further question public competence. Like, the things people find disgusting or that make them scared or angry, is that a legitimate reason to punish people? Like, if we're ruining their livelihoods potentially, or their lives potentially, like, is the fact that the public doesn't like it a sufficient reason? Like, at least if we're doing a legal moralism route and relying on, like, God for our rules for retributivism, then we can point to something else other than just like, well, I don't like that. And also the lack of public knowledge about criminal matters. People don't know the law. People don't know how much crime happens. People don't know what kinds of crime happen. Unless they, like, are really woke as fuck. Anyway, then we get to Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is, it's our author's pet theory. Chapter 7, the unified theory, is what this book was written to promote. So it's not one that there's like a lot of scholarship on, but it's an interesting idea that we'll talk about in brief anyway. The unified theory of punishment is the author's idea that we can bring all of these together, that we can use any of them whenever we need them if we have something that ties them together, some theoretical, philosophical basis, some kind of bedrock for why we would use one or the other. And he says we need to have a reason to punish that's beyond just because they deserve it, that's beyond just because we want to scare them into not committing crime, that's beyond any of these things. And he says that we can do that if we focus on the idea of punishment as a means to protecting people's rights. If what we're focused on is protecting people's rights to, let's just say, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then we can draw from these different theoretical fields, like rehabilitation, deterrence, retributivism, expressivism. We can use the things that are good from those with a central core, a purpose that gives it a good groundwork to build on. And there's been an attempt at a unifying model penal code in the US, which the model penal code is kind of cool. It's not actual law, it is a model, but it says that its general purposes are to prevent the commission of offenses, deterrence, to promote the correction and rehabilitation of offenders, rehabilitation, to safeguard offenders against excessive, disproportionate, or arbitrary punishment, proportionality and desert, to give fair warning of the nature of the sentences that may be imposed on convictions of an offense. I guess that's more just like helping knowledge, but sounds kind of like expressivism. To differentiate offenders with a view to adjust individualization in their treatment. That's kind of more like the rehabilitation restoration stuff, like individualize the treatment. So the model penal code has its problems. One, it's outdated, which a lot of our laws are. But 2, critics argue that the code is incoherent, that it doesn't have any like coherent central idea as to why we should do it this way. And so that's where our author's idea of focus on rights, have all those different like purposes and aims, with the central one being protecting people's rights. It's not just his idea. Yeah, page 127 starts going all into the rights stuff. But it's an idea that has been discussed in the British idealist movement, which he gets into. John Stuart Mill comes back up, of course. So read that part about the British idealists and how they talk about why rights are so important and how punishment can play into protecting rights. Guys, this is a little long chapter. He gets into how it should be used to build a stakeholder society, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. So read those chapters. What was that, 3 through 8? I'm sorry. I will post the tests for those. I promise that tests 2, 3, and 4 are much more simple than test 1. Test 1 is the longest and most difficult. And the fact that they're just on Blackboard and you can take all the time you want to do them should mean that you have time to like flip through the book and rewatch this video to answer successfully. I'm more interested in any questions that are on the tests that involve your input, for you to critically think about some of these things rather than just regurgitate the material. But yeah, they shouldn't be too hard because they're just like, they're designed to be taken in like 20 minutes. So I don't think it should be a problem. And since this is the last week of class, you'll just have those 4 tests. Test 1, which is already up, and then 2 and 3 in the final exam. They're just going to be on Blackboard. Knock those out. They do need to be done before the exam period is over so I can grade them. Yeah. Excuse me. The last part of the book, part 3, is case studies. Chapter 8 is capital punishment, how to and whether we should justify it through the lens of different theories. And so you can read that, but I think it would be more interesting for you to try to figure that out yourself. Although, go ahead and read it. Yeah, it's kind of easy under retributivism and deterrence. Can't commit any crimes if you're dead, but it's a lot harder under rehabilitation and restoration. You can't be restored if you're dead. And he explains why the unified theory would be so great for that. Chapter 9 is juvenile offenders and what to do with them. Like, should we actually give lenience to juveniles? And about how their brains aren't developed yet. And how those social bonds are even more important for juvenile offenders. And the juvenile gender justice discrepancy. But again, those all sound more like social problems. 10 is about domestic abuse, and there the whole considerations of the victim come up pretty strongly. 11 is sexual crimes, which I don't super like to talk about because it can be pretty triggering. So, that's the book. You're welcome. One video. So, let me put those tests up. They're on Blackboard. More instructions will be on Blackboard. You will receive emails once they are up and once this video is up. So, yeah. Let me see if I can get my cat on camera again. Here's my cat. Have strength going into the exam period. I am in a little bit more of a stable place now, so if you email me, I will more likely respond. And that's it, I guess. And yeah, hope y'all have had a great semester, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.